Welcome back to part 2 of the Edified podcast with Pastor Vlad Burlaka. In part 1, we heard about his powerful testimony, how the Lord saved him, shaped him, and eventually began stirring his heart towards ministry. Now, in this second half, we're going to step into the next chapter. What happened after that calling became clear and how God led him down the path of training, formation, and seminary life, which ultimately led to him starting a church plant here in the heart of Sacramento. So let's just jump back in. Vlad, earlier you shared how that calling became clear, and that leads perfectly into this next question. Can you share what that catalyst was or what prompted you to consider and later pursue going to seminary?
I just wanted to be equipped.
Okay.
So to me, like I jokingly mentioned the John Piper, John MacArthur sermons, merging them. I didn't know how to study the Bible. I didn't know how to create my own lessons, my own sermons. I didn't know how to counsel. I didn't know how to shepherd. And I realized, okay, I need formal training to be able to do that which I desire to do. So it began with a desire, but I realized that I didn't have enough tools in my tool belt.
Got it.
And I needed to be equipped.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, like I mentioned, junior year of my undergrad, it wasn't this is a career path, or I expect to be a paid pastor, or I'm going to be a church planter. None of that. I want to faithfully shepherd in the local church, and I want to go to an institution that's going to be able to equip me to do exactly that. Mm-hmm. So I finished my undergrad in accounting, that till this day I've not used a single day of my undergrad degree, because I did not expect that this would be a career path or this is what I'm going to do for work. It was, I'm going to be an accountant or whatever the Lord provides. And if he creates opportunities, I'm going to serve in the local church. And to do this, I want to be better equipped. So therefore I want to go to seminary.
Got it. All right. But when we're talking about seminaries, there's lots of seminaries out there, right? Why Master's Seminary versus, say, a seminary much closer to our neck of the woods right here in Sacramento, like Cornerstone, or say an online seminary? Was there something specific about Master's Seminary that drew you there? Just for listeners out there, just to kind of understand the reasoning.
Yeah, my reasoning shouldn't be their reasoning if you're considering seminary. If you're considering seminary, go to an institution that you want to learn from those professors. Right? Who are the guys that you want to glean from? Okay. And every seminary will have its strengths and weaknesses, whether it's, hey, we create preachers, pastors, we create more theologians, right? Everyone's going to have more of a niche emphasis. Masters for me was easy because I was doing local church ministry here in Sacramento. I was considering either long distance or local seminaries, where I could just do online work and not leave Sacramento. That was my original objective and goal, because I wanted to do ministry in the local church that I was a part of. Mm-hmm. And then I started chatting with my friend in LA. And he had attended the Master's Seminary. He was an elder at Grace Community. I've already mentioned that he was one of the mentors in my life. And I remember getting on a call with him and saying, hey, what seminary would you advised me to consider? And he said, hey, I think you should come here to Masters. And this was really key. He said, because I think you need the church more than you need the seminary.
Wow.
I think you need to see what healthy church ministry looks like and what mentorship you could experience in the context of Grace Community Church, more so than even the seminary. So it was a 2-for-1 kind of deal. Yeah. And to me, I was sold. I said, hey, I want to be in a place where not only am I taught in a classroom setting, I can actually see visibly an example of what being a pastor and a good pastor looks like by surrounding myself with pastors that do exactly that on a weekly basis. So to me, that was a no-brainer. Plus, to me, it was, at that time, I was also considering teaching in kind of a secular institution, and there was opportunities with the degree that I would have gotten there where I could build on it for that specifically.
You're saying the seminary degree, right?
Yeah.
So you weren't necessarily set on, coming out of seminary, I'm going to enter full-time ministry as a pastor. Okay.
Not at all.
Got it. Okay.
I just wanted to be equipped to be used by the Lord faithfully wherever He'd place me.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to have. And, just want to say off the bat, I major respect to what you and other men are doing by going to seminary. I mean, it takes a lot of grit, a lot of work day in, day out, But to serve our listeners in understanding what the expectations are on you as let's say a student of the seminary or attendee, perhaps if you can kind of give us a better insight on what that looks like, as well as, let's say if somebody were to choose a similar route like you to move out of town, right? Versus somebody that would choose something local. What does that look like? And also, if you can kind of touch in, I know it's kind of multiple layers here,
it's okay.
But if you can also touch on what that would look like versus, say, somebody who's single, right? Does not have any attachments in terms of like wife. You were married at the time, right? No kids, you mentioned earlier.
No kids, but married.
But eventually you had kids. So what did that look like? What were the challenges and expectations of the seminary?
Yeah, the move itself, I think that if you can do in-person training, that's always going to be the ideal.
Okay.
So I'm not knocking online seminary. I think there's pros and cons to it. I think sitting in a classroom setting, engaging with professors and other students is going to be the ideal. So therefore, if there is an opportunity and the ability for you to attend in person, even if that means moving to whatever seminary you desire to go to, I would highly encourage that. That would be like my number one priority. And that means that's going to come with risk and challenges, right? For us, I don't want to belabor this question or this answer. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but for example, I'm a planner. Right. Mm-hmm. I had all of seminary tuition saved up before we moved to LA. I had 4 years of tuition saved up. That was the goal. We were already there, and I was selling used cars at that time, selling used cars. I got into a bad deal where I lost all of our savings basically. So for us, we were moving to LA with about 6 months worth of savings. My wife didn't have a job. I didn't have a job. We were just going to trust the Lord with it. And I remember telling my wife saying, hey, I don't think we should do this. I don't think this is wise. We're not in a financial position to do it. And she said to me, I know you will never give up on this. And I'd rather have us do it now than 10 years from now when we've planted roots. So I think that the less roots you have planted, the easier it's going to be. So if you're single and you have this aspiration, go. There's nothing wrong with going, but it's going to come with its unique challenges. The more you have a wife, children, other responsibilities, then there's more of a risk factor. But no matter if you have kids, if you're single, there's going to be, hey, I have to trust the Lord that He will provide as I take this step of faith and risk, right? Yeah. Exactly what even you mentioned with this podcast, right? Yeah. There's this risk and a leap of faith. Yeah. And it's a good thing to be pushed in a way where you say, I don't have the roadmap. I don't exactly know how it's going to work out, but Jesus, I trust that you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, let's say somebody was in a similar situation like you that didn't have the tuition, right? Can it still work? Can you still make it work by going to a seminary like Masters? Do they offer, grants or things of the like?
Yeah, and that's
a huge move, right?
I'm not trying to plug Masters here because I want to be unbiased, but I am biased. Yeah. If you move on-site, location-wise, to the Master's Seminary at this point, they do have grants or some kind of support where basically tuition is free.
Wow.
So
it's incredible.
In-person training at Master's is tuition free because you have supporters that are donating that tuition amount.
That's incredible. Yeah. Amazing. So what about your early conversations? Were there any pushback from your wife? You mentioned that she said, do it, but beyond that, were there any challenges there emotionally, working through that process of like, hey, this is what the next, 4 years of seminary? Yeah, share a little bit about what expectations a woman should have with a husband that's going to seminary.
I mean, if you're leaving home, you're leaving family, friends, those connections.
Yeah.
So there's always that fear factor where you're thinking, well, will I cultivate new relationships? If you're going to a place that has a healthy local church, you will. Mm-hmm. Like the Lord's going to bring people into your life. So I think the biggest challenge that we had, the two challenges that we encountered more emotionally.
During seminary?
Before moving over.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'll kind of get into what that looks like during. But before was, number one, okay, we are pressing pause on it's as if we're pressing pause on our life right now while all of our friends are continuing, right? They're continuing in their careers. They're buying homes. They're progressing in whatever the stepladder approach is to the next stage of adulting.
Right.
But for us, it was like, okay, we're going to press pause for 4 years because we don't know what the next chapter is.
Right.
And looking back now, our friends, we're in the same place, right? The Lord has different paths for different couples. So don't worry about that. Number two, the relationships. Well, the Lord will provide relationships in a local church that you go to. So those were the two kind of emotional concerns that we had. The rigors during seminary is that time is a commodity, like we all know right now. And as a result, because you're doing study and you're probably working and you're doing ministry, there is a season where you're not neglecting the family, but there is a sacrifice that comes with the extra hours that you have to put into study, which means there are certain Saturdays where you don't spend time as a family because you're preparing to write or writing a paper, or there's certain evenings where maybe you're not as available because there is an exam the next day. So that's where I think wives have to be on board that this is the Lord's calling for your life. Because in those moments where you have to take withdrawals from the family unit, right? Less time with your spouse, less time with your kids. If your spouse is on the same mission and page as you, they are going to be supportive of and even willing to make that sacrifice at times.
Of course.
Right? If I have a late night ministry meeting right now in the ministry, and my kids are saying to my wife, why is daddy not home? It'd be awesome if daddy could put us to bed. Right? She could easily be like, the church and the members of the church, they take daddy away from us.
Yeah.
Right? Like if that's the viewpoint, then that can be extremely toxic for the family unit. If it's like we get to support daddy in the work that he's doing, and we get to, let's pray for him right now.
Yeah.
Because even though he's making this sacrifice and we're making this sacrifice, we know there's a kingdom impact. Mm-hmm. So that's where if your wife is not on board for the ministry or your wife is not on board to do seminary, I would pump the brakes and seek counsel on you guys getting on the same page, because it has to be a team project.
There's got to be unity.
Because there's going to be sacrifices, absolutely. Like there's going to be weekly time sacrifices because of the extra work that you have to do.
Okay. What about personally? Because I remember, if we could take it more on a personal note, of the challenges that you faced or potentially faced. Because I remember there was the church I used to go to when I was a youth leader back at Third. There was a guy from another church that came over, and he was leading the youth group, basically leading a sermon. And he went to the Master's Seminary, and he recalled a season of time that he basically was giving us account. And he mentioned that there came a time where it got so, it was like a grind, right? Where you're studying so much that your personal walk with the Lord becomes less and less fresh, less and less alive. Would you say that that is fairly common of seminary students? Did you go through that? Or if you didn't, what did you do to combat that in your own personal walk with the Lord?
That viewpoint and that experience is so common. That's why you kind of have this cliche saying that don't go to seminary because it's cemetery. That's where you go for your faith to die. And I think that if you don't have the personal relationship with the Lord and the discipline to maintain your own communion with the Lord, then just like anything else, it becomes a profession. John Piper has this really great book, Brothers, We Are Not Professionals, that the ministry isn't a job. The ministry is, as you pursue your Lord and Savior, your shepherd, Jesus Christ, you are helping others as his under shepherd to shepherd others as they pursue Christ. So, I mean, the irony, right? Like, you're being trained to help others grow in their relationship with the Lord, and yet you yourself are not maintaining your relationship with the Lord. The hypocrisy there is toxic and dangerous. So I think that easily you can begin to justify, I'm going to pray less, or I'm not going to pray at all, or I'm not going to do my own personal reading, or I'm not going to meditate on the Word and spend this intimate communion with Jesus because I'm writing a paper on justification by faith, right? Or I am reading this book. So you begin to outweigh the hours that you're investing in training and saying, well, that is my devotional time.
Right.
And I'm not saying it can't be devotional, and it has been devotional for me, and even the weekly grind of sermon prep, there's a devotional component there, but you can never neglect the own personal time with Christ. And in seminary, I had this class, very first semester, on prayer. And our requirement was for us to pray for, I want to say, if I'm remembering accurately, an hour a day for 30 days straight and journal about it. And that was to combat this whole approach of like, okay, you're about to dive into study mode, but are you neglecting your time with God?
Yeah.
And I was forced to, if I'm going to be honest and not lie that I did this assignment, then I was forced to go on prayer walks and fill in an hour a day of time with the Lord and wrestling with the Lord. Because it's so easy to say, because I'm training, I don't have to have my own personal walk. You have to keep the two in line. You can't neglect one for the other.
I find the same struggle where, because I think maybe I'm so trained to think in terms of like works, right? Like, do this, cause and effect, right? But with prayer, you don't see instant gratification or instant results, right? Like you're kind of putting in that relationship with the Lord. So I totally hear what you're saying, because that's a challenge for many people to not put so much emphasis on prayer, even though it's so powerful. So beyond that, were there any other challenges that you experienced in seminary that you think are noteworthy, or that you think would be helpful to the listeners? Kind of expectations of what you came in with, but maybe were totally opposite of what you thought seminary was going to look like.
Yeah, I think you come into seminary assuming that you know a lot, and you come out realizing you know very, very little. So because you're drinking from a fire hose and there's so much content that you're consuming, you begin to realize that there are theological truths that are a bit more nuanced than you previously thought. There's other opinions, there's differing views. So I think being teachable and open-minded, not so open-minded that your brain falls out,
right,
but having discernment and being open-minded and teachable versus I'm set in my ways and this experience is just to affirm what I believe I should be doing, because maybe through the experience you realize that your giftedness is different than you had expected. When you're forced to do preaching lab and get feedback, maybe the feedback that you're getting is, I don't know if you're gifted for specific pulpit ministry. Maybe you're more of a counselor. Maybe you're more of a support role, right? So being teachable is really important. And number two, the big lesson that I learned is I'm a control freak. I want to know what the next thing is. I want to plan accordingly. And what I loved about our time down south was that we were forced into situations where we didn't know what the solution would be. I didn't know how we would pay for things. I didn't know how I would finish this work. I didn't know if there would be ministry opportunities after we graduated, right? And yet it's so sweet to put yourself into a scenario where you don't know what the result is going to be, and you have to trust that the Lord will lead you through it. So that was a major takeaway and a lesson that I learned from that time.
All right. Kind of moving forward to, like there's maybe even some of the listeners that might be going through that season of preparation, whether it's seminary or maybe it's just, courses that they're taking and studying, being trained up in the Word. What would you tell them about staying faithful in that, if you can call it a hidden season? Because I remember like when you went to seminary, even though we were in different churches, there were times where we collaborated on certain ministries. And I remember when you went, it's almost like you disappeared off the face of the earth because you were in seminary, right? And it's so easy to kind of dismiss that and be, not really think about, and yet you've got so much going on, right? In seminary, you're studying, but so what encouragement would you give somebody that's currently in that season?
Yeah, be faithful and I know I sound like a broken record. Be faithful in the local church that you're a part of as you're studying. That's where that faithfulness is going to be. That's where that accountability is going to be. That's where you're going to use what you're learning. You don't want it to be swampy. You don't want the water coming in and just building up. You want an outlet for it, and that means be faithful with whatever the Lord provides. When we went down south, I was in the pulpit at least once a month in our local church context. I was creating lesson plans for our youth ministry. I was in active leadership mode. Then I go to another church and I'm just another brand new member. So I'm faithful in the little things. I show up. If you need me to stack chairs, I'll stack chairs. If you need me to bring donuts, I'll bring donuts. Yeah. It's not this mindset of I have had this prominent role, so therefore give me this. It's how can I just faithfully serve in a local church and use what I'm learning through the means of leadership or discipleship that I've been given in the body that I'm a part of. The worst thing that you can do is focus so much on seminary that you don't use what you're learning in the actual church body. It has to be a combo of both.
So don't be a silo when you're in the seminary, but rather to live out Hebrews 10:24, right?
Yep.
If we're to reference that. You are faithful in the local body that you're attending while attending seminary, and you're looking for opportunities as they present themselves, you're serving and you're giving back to the body of Christ.
That's so well put. And that connection to Hebrews 10 is perfect in this specific context. Just to capitalize on that, one more example.
Yeah, please.
I was an intern there at Grace Community, and the expectations from the man the pastor that I was interning under was that I had to be at church in the mornings and in the evenings because I was part of college ministry and there's opportunities for me to serve college students.
Yeah.
Right. I remember during the week, he catches me in the hallway and he's like, "Were you at church on Sunday night?" And I said, "No, I wasn't. I was actually finishing up a paper, studying for something." Yeah. I forget exactly what it was. And I remember he said this. He said, "You get a C in that class next time, and you show up to church on Sunday night and you minister." Right? Wow. So for him, the priority was your family, your church body, and then seminary. And the worst thing that you can do is flip-flop that, where seminary and then you neglect the family and you neglect stirring others up to love and good deeds.
Absolutely. That was very great lesson to learn, right? Looking back, is there any other things that you would say that, that seminary taught you that you're still applying today as a pastor?
Discipline.
Discipline.
I think discipline. If you don't schedule it out, if you don't carve out time, it will not get done. So I think that for me to be faithful to my home, to the best of my ability, right? I was working full time. At that time, I had a wife and one child, and I was teaching a Bible study on a weekly basis, right? So full time, family, seminary, plus preaching on a weekly basis. And that means you realize that you have to be disciplined in your approach. Where if I want to be faithful in the home, that means I have to rise at this time, do my devotional time by this time, get to the books or to the work or whatever it is. I think that especially young men, if you can bring discipline into your life, then the Lord will begin to use you in ways that you could not have expected, because you're creating more pockets and more opportunities to do far above and beyond than what you originally anticipated to do, because you're just meandering and wandering around, versus I have to be disciplined in when I rise, when I go to sleep, what I prioritize, how much time I spend into studying and other people. So discipline was a major takeaway. I think I learned what discipline was in seminary, and it's something that has persisted as a result of it.
That's amazing. A very, very amazing lesson to learn from the seminary, I'm assuming. So as far as men, right, or listeners that have that aspiration to teach, right, if we can segue into that, but they're having doubts, fears, they're on the fence, what would you say to them about pursuing that? Assuming, let's say if they're single, they don't have any attachments, or if they're married, they don't have the challenge or the burden of, like, let's say, their spouse not being on the same page. If that's all there, everybody's on the same page, they have that going for them, but they just have doubts. What encouragement would you give them?
I don't know how you can't have doubts. Not anything, too strong of a word. Most things that you do that's going to be meaningful for the Lord is going to have an element of risk in it.
Absolutely.
Hudson Taylor, missionary to inland China, had this famous quote. He said, "Without an element of risk in our exploits for God, there is no need for faith." Without an element of risk in our exploits for God, there is no need for faith. If you're doing the safe thing all the time, there's no need to have faith and trust in God, right? It's when you step out and do the risky thing, the thing that you're not sure, is there going to be, what's going to come of this? But if there's this compulsion and desire, all right, that's where you have to start with. Don't worry about the doubts. If the doubts are like, I don't know if I desire to do this, then talk to other men in your life and pray and figure out. But I'm talking about if there is this overwhelming desire that I want to do this. If there's a desire to shepherd people, that's the key. If you love ministry and teaching, but you don't love people, you've already set yourself up for failure. Right? There's that pastoral comment that is ridiculous, where pastors will sometimes say jokingly, like, "Oh, I would love the ministry if it wasn't for the people." And you hear them say that, and you're like, yikes, like, why are you talking like that? You shouldn't be talking like that. Because it is the people that is the ministry.
Exactly.
So if there's a love for people, if there's a love to teach people, if there's a love to counsel people, if there is this overwhelming compulsion and desire to do it, and you've been affirmed by other men to do it, and your wife is on the same page, but you're worried about the risk, take the leap of faith, right? But if you're doubting your calling and your aspiration, that's where talk to other men in your life, because that's the key. Seminaries don't make ministers or pastors. Churches do, and other pastors. So you need affirmation from other men. Don't be a maverick that does this thing on your own, where you're like, I haven't talked to another man about this at all, and I'm just going to do this because I have this desire. Don't do that. Talk to other men in your local church. Get that affirmation.
What's that saying that goes like, you can't put a square into a round, I forget it, but where you can't fit a square into a circle or something like that.
Yeah.
So be, follow your purpose or your calling, essentially, right? Whatever you're called for, pursue it, but get affirmation of it.
You need that, because there's certain guys in seminary that were there because they finished Bible college for their undergrad, and they're like, what do I do next?
Right.
Well, seminary just makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they get in 2-3 years into it, and they realize, like, wow, I actually don't have an aspiration to minister to people in a specific way. So make sure that you get that confirmation before you make that decision.
Yeah.
Because the guys that go to seminary at City Bible are guys that have been affirmed by the pastors.
Yeah.
They've participated even in the internship that we provide, and we've actually challenged some of them. We really think you should consider seminary.
Wow.
Right? Where they're skeptical and they're doubtful. We're like, no, we think you should pursue more training because the Lord has gifted you and enabled you to do this work.
From what you shared earlier, it sounded like seminary was, kind of like a refining journey in your life. And that shaped not just your theology, it looks like it shaped your heart as well. And out of that came a calling not just to serve, but to plant, which brings us to one of the most exciting parts of your story, where you stepped out, you took that leap of faith, planting a church. So walk us through, how did that vision first take shape?
It wasn't me. This was not my idea till this day.
What does that mean?
There's not my idea whatsoever. I'm not a church planner. I'm so shocked at how everything has happened. I'm shocked at how funny the Lord can be at times, and his humor is unique. I never, in the years at seminary, thought I was ever interested in church planning. Like, it's not my thing. If you know me personally, I'm like, calculate the pros and cons, assess every single detail. I'm readily risk adverse. I'm a risk adverse person. And therefore, this did not come from me. This came from others. So I was visiting Sacramento, and I was visiting my mom.
Yeah.
And I had a friend reach out and say, he was in ministry at that time. He's working with local churches here. And he's like, can we grab breakfast? I'm like, I'd love to. Let's catch up. And as we're catching up, he gives this idea. He plants this seed where he begins to talk about planting a new church in the hub of Sacramento. And him and the organizations that were involved were really thinking that I would be the guy to do it. And I remember in that moment saying, no, like, not interested.
Jonah approach.
I'm to Tarshish versus Nineveh. I'm like, number one, I'm not a church planner. Number two, I'm in my 20s. I'm way too young to be in this role. Number three, I am full-time at Grace Community Church, and I have no plans of moving back to Sacramento. At that time, my wife and I never talked about moving back to Sacramento.
Oh, wow.
So I left that meeting basically verbally closing that door. I said, no, I'm not interested. And when I was in LA, I started chatting to some of the local pastors there at Grace. And it was interesting where a few of them said, I think you should pray about that. It kind of sounds like that might be something that would fit you well. Them just kind of seeing my ministry at Grace and seeing how the Lord had built me, and going back to Sacramento with the Slavic background, they just thought it was a good fit, right? So I was actually challenged by others to consider it. So that's when I started doing research.
So that affirmation, those early conversations, kind you took that as from the Lord, right? Obviously.
Just men that knew me, yeah. Like,
Okay.
I believe that the Lord had given them the wisdom to give me guidance, and for me not to do it at that time, but just be open to considering it.
Right. Okay. What about by that point, you're out of seminary, you're serving at Grace Community Church, right, in the college ministry? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still, when that meeting happened, I'm still wrapping up seminary.
you're
So I
still
still had
wrapping it up.
another 6
Okay.
months. But yes, I'm serving in the college ministry, and I'm full-time at Grace Community.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did that, those conversations, you basically took those home, and how did that conversation look like with your wife? What were her thoughts on it? Because that's an extremely life change. To your point, you said that you weren't considering moving back. I mean,
Yeah, I think she was excited about it. She was actually one of the individuals that challenged me to pursue it even more. So, you know how they say, behind every great man is even a greater woman. I genuinely believe that her being my helpmate and being just my support in different seasons affirmed me to move forward when I was personally anxious about something. So remember the seminary move? She was the one that's like, no, I think we should do this. And in this specific instance, she saw what I was doing at Grace Community, and it was primarily administrative work. My college ministry, that was the ministry that I was doing, but what I was absorbed in was a lot of logistics, administrative marketing, planning, and she just said, hey, like, you went to seminary to shepherd, to be a shepherd, to work with people. And if there's this opportunity and a need, then maybe we should consider it. So that's when I just started assessing, is there even a need? Like, do you come back to Sacramento to plant another church, or is there a specific area that warrants planting another church?
yeah. And you mentioned, I mean, if we're going to compare the Jonah story, right? Nineveh and Sacramento. I read through some of your Grace Advance documents, material that you sent to Grace Advance. Why Sacramento? Why was there such a need in your earlier discussions of why planting a church in Sacramento made sense? Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, when I started doing research, so after that meeting, after the elders are like, hey, consider it, after my wife is like, hey, let's pray and consider about it, that's when the data gathering starts. Okay, let's analyze. Is there a need in Sacramento?
The accountant in you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
That's
it
a
did
good point.
benefit.
Yeah, the
It
business
helped.
side of it, I guess. Yeah, but I sat down with a few like-minded pastors in Sacramento. I asked for a meeting, and I said, hey, is there a need for another church in Sacramento? And if so, where? And a few of them said yes, 50 corridor by Sac State.
Oh.
So geographically, that was like an area that automatically was stress. And I remember talking to Pastor Scott over at Doxa and picking his brain because he had planted 2 or 3 years prior to City Bible. And he had given some counsel about what the needs were in Sacramento and some of the research that he had done where Sacramento landed in the most unchurched cities in California. So Sacramento proper, the hub itself, the city had more of a need than potentially suburbia, right? Sac County and Sac City are a little different. So for us, it was always, can we meet a need in a specific region? And if so, where? And I mean, you know the backstory of City Bible. Geographically, outside of having to move around because of meeting restrictions in COVID during the COVID era, we've kind of stayed in that East Sacramento region the whole time, because even if there were opportunities of let's go to this region because there's a building, or let's go here because we can buy land here, it was always, no, we're here to meet a specific area need, even though there's a lot of commuter culture in Sacramento, but
so it
the
wasn't
goal
based
was to
out
be
of
there.
Convenience, it was based out of need.
I would say
that's
so.
That's where the church plant came out of, or it wasn't just based out of like, say somebody just, I want to plant a church, right? You saw a need and people were speaking into your life, you received those affirmations, and God was, opening doors in a sense, right?
It's well put.
So before ChatGPT, when you can enter in how to start a church plant, reformed church plant, right?
Yeah.
Take us to those early days. What did planting a church practically look like?
It's exactly what you just said. It's a notepad and a pen and like thinking, where do I even start with this? So I started reading anything that I could on church planting, good and bad, and everything in between.
Yeah.
All the resources out there. I talked to other church planners, and basically our approach was unique in the sense that there wasn't specifically a group that was waiting for us. So sometimes you have already a group, a nucleus in a city that has been meeting, or a few families that are like, hey, there's a need. For me, it was more of leaders or certain leaders coming and saying, hey, would you consider planting in Sacramento? And no one is transplanting from LA to Sacramento with me. So it's cultivating the core group there in Sacramento, right? So that's where kind of the grassroots approach, where I just started reaching out to people that I knew and saying, hey, would you be interested in participating in this work? Would your elders bless you to leave your good church that you're a part of to start a new work? And it was more of a grassroots approach where once the need was established and the geography was set in, I put together a proposal, kind of like a vision casting proposal of what the church would be. And that's when I started traveling regularly from LA to Sacramento to have these vision casting potential core group meetings where people just came into a living room setting and we're just hearing, hey, this is what this thing could be.
Okay. All right. So for the next one, just thinking back to before the core group meetings, or even maybe during, what were some of the early challenges or things that got in the way of the church plant actually happening? And if you can also share, what was one of the hardest things or hardest parts about planning a church?
When you're boots on the ground somewhere, you're living there, you're focusing on the new work, the church plant, it looks very different than if you are living elsewhere trying to start a new work in a different city. So the reality was my responsibilities were still at Grace Community Church. I'm working full time. Yeah. I'm leading a Bible study. I had wrapped up seminary already, so that wasn't on my workload. I wasn't carrying that weight, but nonetheless, I had to make trips to Sacramento. So as weird as that sounds, one of the challenges was the fact that on a Friday night after working a full work week, I would get my wife, and at that time, my little girl, she was probably under 2, even at that point, into the car, and we would drive through the night after dinner on Friday night so that my kid could sleep, right?
Yeah.
And then we'd roll into Sacramento early in the morning, try to get some rest. We would have meetings all day, and then we'd have the vision casting meeting in the evening. On Sunday, I would go to corporate worship somewhere, spend some time with family, and Sunday night, drive back through the night to LA. And yeah, on some of those drives where Ava is screaming her head off on the grapevine, I'm like, I'm going to email this entire group and say, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore.
Yeah, I can see how that could happen.
As simple as that sounds, that was a major challenge where it was trying to juggle this while starting this. And then there were just doors that are being opened at Grace Community where there were opportunities for me to stay there for a longer period of time and take positions there that were being afforded to me, and seeing, okay, the stable, the secure versus the uncertain and the risky. And that challenge of even having the temptation of not doing the risky thing, but doing the more stable thing is what was there. But that's where, like, to get a little bit back into the motivation of pressing on through those challenges, before all of this, my dad had passed away, and it was like sudden. We weren't expecting it, and it was a shock to our family, right? And it was in that tumultuous season where all of the stuff, hey, would you consider planting? That's why I said I was visiting my mom and not my dad. My dad was already in glory, right? It's in this season where all of these ideas or opportunities to plant are coming. Yeah. And I remember working through 1 Corinthians 15, which is Paul's glorious resurrection chapter, where he talks about the resurrection from the dead and the bodily resurrection. And in that chapter, he says, if there is no resurrection from the dead, we are to be the most pitied of all men, right? So that means that the Christian should be living in such a way that if there isn't future glory and reward, then what they're doing and the sacrifices that they're making should look absolutely foolish and ridiculous, right? If you believe that there's eternity, then why aren't you living in such a risky way, doing everything that you can for the kingdom? And that passage hit me like a ton of bricks, because I said, you know what? If I stayed here, like say if I kept doing exactly what I'm doing, and if there is no resurrection from the dead and this Christianity thing is fake, for example, I could look back and say, I lived a pretty decent life. I had a position. I raised my family in a home. Everything was good. So that to me was a catalyst of like, Lord, if you're opening a door, even if there are going to be challenges, you are going to help us endure and press on through it. So that was a huge challenge, the travel. Another challenge that we pressed through was we were working with different organizations, and it ended up not working out. We lost a lot of our funding early on. So there's just so much uncertainty, and yet the Lord's kindness and faithfulness just caused us to press on through it. When we lost the funding, not to get into the details, but when we lost the funding, I remember calling up every single family that had committed to the plant saying, we've lost all of our resources. And every single person said, so what? The Lord's going to provide. Let's go. Let's keep going, right?
Wow.
So just everybody was on board, all hands on deck, because we believed that God was opening up the door.
Yeah, and if that's not an affirmation, I don't know what is, right? Like, if you're saying every single person that was part of the core group meeting, right? And I remember attending a few of those and just being extremely...
But you didn't commit.
Yeah, well, all right, like eventually.
So, okay, publicly, I just want everyone to affirm and acknowledge that my dear brother Eddie broke my heart by not committing to the core, but then he came and he was doing his ministry.
It was a different season. Ministry. Our church was going through a rough season. And, while I wasn't an ordained pastor, I was a, youth leader shepherding youth, and that season of my life, it was just, I felt a burden to, our senior pastor stepped down, other leaders were leaving, and I felt a burden to, in my mind, the way it made sense was to weather the storm,
which was the right decision
for the youth. And so I had to pull back, even though I was just so conflicted. I really wanted to be part of that journey, but it was incredible because, and it's just something that my wife and I have been talking about over the, early on before we joined CBC is that, we thought, hey, I didn't want the hype of it being a church plant and being like this cool new startup, right? Like if we're talking in modern terms, like being a church plant, to be the influencing factor for me to go there. And so we came out of that, thinking like, what are other healthy churches besides CBC? We knew it was a healthy church plant, but I didn't want, if there was ever an ounce of like, oh, this is why I'm actually considering it. So we looked at like a few churches, and we settled at Grace Bible Church of Fair Oaks. And, we attended it, and awesome church, but, we went through membership class, but for some reason we just didn't, even though we got into the community groups and all that, we just didn't feel like peace to stay. And it wasn't for any reason like, oh, somebody hurt us or the preaching was bad. It was great. People are amazing. And so we after like 8 months, we were praying and we're like, man, I don't know why. Like, we just can't sign the paperwork. We can't sign the dotted line, And it came down to a point where we just said, I think end of December of 2016, 8 months after you guys launched, or 10 months. And we decided, let's not give CBC a try, but let's attend and see what happens. And so I think it was the second service at Hiram Johnson High School that we were worshiping, and I just have this peace on my heart, like this joy, like where I feel like I'm home. This is where the Lord wants me. And driving home, I didn't want to influence my wife, but I basically said, like, honey, like I know what my answer is, but where are you at? And she basically said, you know what? I think this is where God wants us to be. And, you know, for me, that was an affirmation like, man, this is home. This is home for us. So it was just kind of, sorry for kind of derailing, going off on a tangent.
I love it.
But
I love
it was
that.
just
It's amazing how the Lord intertwines relationships, and you guys have been a blessing ever since you've come. So we're glad that you are part of this local body.
Thank you, brother. I mean, the church has definitely been a blessing to us. And just even hearing your encouragement when we came in, right, where you said, hey, take a season. You just came out of like, I think I was 8 years in youth ministry, where you said, hey, take a season of just being shepherded, just being to receive the word and just being edified. And I really appreciated that. That was just, it sounded very wise coming from a pastor, right? Like you're saying, like, hey, let the church take care of you. And I needed that, right? And then at a certain point, I'm like sitting and I'm like itching to get started. So, but that's another story. Going back to your journey, right? In the
I think I like your journey more. We should stick with that one.
No. This is about. I think I love the story of how City Bible was planted, and I think there's so much that can be gleaned from it, and just even just the process and the overall journey that you and your family and just went through. So, you know, with that comes, I'm sure, a lot of uncertainty and perhaps even spiritual warfare, right? Internally within you.
I mean, doubts.
There? Yeah. Okay. So,
I mean, you feel like you're not capable. Am I the right person for this? Lord, I'm young. I lack wisdom. I lack experience, right? There's a lot of that.
So besides, you know, the verbal affirmation that you receive from people, which is huge, I think it's kind of like maybe even the one main thing that you need. But was there anything else? Were there any other defining moments where your faith was tested, and you know, in that process, and what gave you the courage to move forward? Outside of like, was there anything, or was the affirmations you received that?
No, it was beyond that for sure. And I think one of the examples of that was, look, when you're rolling into a church and you are one of the youngest people there, or I've had no pastoral experience per se in an official pastoral role. Right? I'm ordained by Grace Community and I'm sent out. So this is my first stint at an opportunity to do the work in a formal, you are an ordained pastor way. So naturally, I begin to think, how does a young guy shepherd families that are older, that have more life experience? How do I shepherd families that have teenagers when I have a toddler and one toddler? So like a lot of this, I feel inadequate for the work, started kind of coming into focus, where I'm like, I don't know if I'm the right guy for this. And there's a lot of doubt that crept in. And I remember having a meeting with Pastor John MacArthur. And we were in this meeting and we were talking about the church plant, and he's asking me questions. And I said, Pastor John, like, how's anybody going to take me seriously? Like, I have no experience. I have no life experience. This is my first time doing it. And I remember this conversation, and he said, you know what, Vlad? All of that is true if the authority stems from you and your experience. But if the authority stems from the Word of God, then you just preach the word, and the authority is the word that is being spoken from the written word, and that will accomplish the work of the ministry. So to me, I think not just the affirmation of, we think you are called to do this, the affirmation of, God, how are you going to do this? And the answer is, I'm going to do it, and you're just going to be a mere vessel and a tool that I'm going to, do it through. So I think, and I don't say this in like any kind of false humility way, it's like, the people were kind enough to let me learn what it means to be a pastor while I was doing it on the job. And it was the Lord that was doing the work through his word and through the power of his spirit, because Jesus is the one that builds the church, not men.
Yeah. But interesting enough, I think we were all learning, right?
Yeah.
We were all learning what it meant to be part of a church plant, how to serve one another. And that's the beautiful part of a church plant, is that, everybody rolls up their sleeves. Everybody serves. I mean, there's that healthy expectation, I think, and since its plant, City Bible's church community has definitely grown very strong. I mean, I think I was counting online, we have 21 community groups, which is amazing. Definitely a need for more, probably. But what are some core values or rhythms you've built, you and the team, right? The core group, well, not necessarily the core group, but the team that you have currently, pastoral staff, right, have built the church around that help foster that community? What would you say?
Yeah, I think it has to go broad first. Like, what are the blueprints and the pillars that make us who we are, right? And it's big God theology, going back full circle to that. Everything's about the glory of God. It's not man-centered ministry. It's God-honoring ministry. So we do things not because they're popular. We do things because they're biblical, right? That becomes the objective of everything that we do. We elevate corporate worship on Sundays. We elevate the ministry of prayer. We elevate the ministry of the one another's, Hebrews 10. We elevate the ministry of evangelism. So those core values and core principles have been non-negotiable from day one. This is who we are DNA-wise. Therefore, every leader is going to encourage, endorse, and support that DNA. So philosophically, even as we've grown, our core essence hasn't changed as a church, right?
Right.
More people, but still the same identity and the same purpose to make mature disciples for the glory of God.
Yeah.
And with the leadership, the staff continues to grow, the elder board continues to grow. It's fostering. This is going to seem overly simplistic. It's fostering what we encourage and challenge our people to do, right? The irony of going back to Hebrews 10:24, for us to challenge the congregation to stir one another up, but yet we as a team don't stir one another up. So do we have a relationship with one another as a team that reflects what the relationship of members in the church ought to be? And even with busy schedules, we strive to do that, right? We meet with the pastors on a weekly basis. And it's a catch-up. How you doing? How's life? What can I pray for? And then we talk about ministry. With the staff, we have staff chapels regularly where someone teaches. We talk about new developments in our life. We break up into little groups and we pray for one another. So I think one of the things that we've been focusing on lately is how do we continue to cultivate and develop a relationship with one another as we spur one another on to pursue Christ as leaders, and not just be silos, isolated individuals that are telling our members to do exactly that.
Absolutely. I think you've answered quite a bit of questions that I had in terms of like, how do you challenge your team towards love, unity, and you provided some great examples for that. So thank you for that. But when it comes to the personal, right, how do you stay grounded, right? Because there's a burden that the ministry places on you and on every pastor, right? Because there's the people aspect of it. I mean, it's not easy. In youth ministry, man, it was. I just remember that it was. Sometimes you do feel like a silo because you're in that position, right? And people look at you as a leader or whatever it is. And how do you stay grounded while carrying the weight of that growing ministry? And from a practical perspective, was there a toll that the church plant had on you, or currently, like in being in ministry, the burden of ministry have on you, on your family? And if not, what are the things or boundaries that you have in place in order to stay grounded, right? To keep the right things in its right place.
That's so good. Yeah, that's so good. Early on, to answer your question in a single word, identity.
Okay.
What is my identity? My identity is a follower of Jesus. That's a member in a local church, a husband of one wife, and a father of 3 children. Right? That is my identity. And as a member of a local church, I have the unique privilege of having the role of being a shepherd. So my identity is not being a pastor. My identity is being a follower of Jesus.
I love that. Yeah.
So that means in the early days, and I'll kind of give you a story. My wife and I, she is pregnant with our second child. The church has just launched, and we are making a hospital visit. And as we're driving to this hospital visit, she begins to cry, right? She begins to cry, and she's overwhelmed. And she starts saying, I don't think I can keep running at this pace, because she was really, really pregnant at that time. And I wasn't a considerate husband in what the schedule looked like even then. And she was like, I don't know if I can. And this is someone that's been supportive of all of this, right? Mm-hmm. And she's like, this pace is really, really hurting me right now. And I remember I told her something. I said, if there's ever a day where you say City Bible or the Burlaka family, I want you to know that I will always choose the Burlaka family, because 1,000 other guys can shepherd the church. Only one guy can shepherd this home.
That's
right.
Powerful.
So like for me, the to stay grounded is my identity is not in the title of pastor. My identity is in the title of follower of Christ, member of a local church, husband, father, community member, and in the role within the church as a member, I have the privilege of being a pastor. So keeping a hierarchy of what is the priority is really important when it comes to kind of the essence, which I would say is identity. Practically, you got to surround yourself with people that are going to be straight shooters and not yes men. Mm-hmm. You can't stay grounded if everyone's always affirming you. So I think that to the best of my ability, I've cultivated a culture of guys that are around me, other leaders and pastors, that have called me out on things and have said, hey, that wasn't wise, or I don't think this is the best way. So yes men around you is dangerous, because then you have no one that pushes back. And to the best of your ability, with the busy schedule that you have, having open relationships where other men and other leaders can ask you hard questions. Right? I gave this example, I forget what context, like in the last week or so. I remember someone was doing an interview with me for a project that they were working on, a seminary project. They had to interview a pastor. And one of the questions was, is there any sin that you are currently concealing?
That was going to be my next one.
And I said, and in response to that, I told that guy, I said, this is the first time, I genuinely believe that this is the first time in almost 7 years of ministry that anyone's asked me that question, because everyone assumes I'm okay.
Yeah.
Everyone assumes I'm all right. And that's where now in the elder structure, we have a designated elder, a lay elder, who is strategic about regularly meeting with each of the staff pastors and me and checking in on how we are doing spiritually, so that there is that level of accountability.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, because I think it's very easy for people to have that impression, perhaps, and I think it's a misguided impression.
Big time.
Right? Where you think that pastors are infallible, and I think especially in the last couple of years, where we see some men that have been disqualified from their ministries, and to realize, like, I spoke with my wife, throughout the years, and we realized, like, hey, we're no better. We are as capable, apart from Christ, right? Apart from Christ, we're as capable of falling into sin, of making those mistakes, but Christ, right?
Amen.
So thank you for sharing that. That was powerful, and for you guys to be vulnerable and place yourselves in a place of vulnerability to be challenged is huge. I think that churches that don't. I think that if there are people that are listening and you are in ministry, encouragement. I think that's a great encouragement for you guys to maybe start incorporating that in your own teams. So thank you, Vlad, for bringing that up. So for those listening, right, if you could serve those that are listening, that feel stirred to maybe not necessarily plant a church, although that may well be the case. Maybe there are some listeners out there that have that desire or calling, or maybe lead in some way. How would you encourage them to pursue that call faithfully, to whether it's plant a church, go to seminary? I mean, I know you touched upon the seminary part, but let's say start a ministry, plant a church, do something for the Lord, whether it's inside the church or outside of it, but just like to build the kingdom. And second part of that, how can they sustain, what encouragement would you give them for the role that community accountability plays in sustaining that calling?
Yeah. And I think that the reason why you added that second part to that question is because it's essential to even answer that first part, that any new ministry is going to be in community and affirmation of the ministry by the leaders of whatever church you're a part of. So for example, there is no isolated maverick type ministries. If you are a street evangelist, you should still be submitting yourself to the authority of elders that are going to be guiding you and making sure that you're not spewing heresy even on the streets, right? You have people that will go to college campuses and all that, and what kind of equipping have they gotten? Is anybody keeping them accountable for what they're teaching? Is anybody keeping them accountable for how they're doing spiritually? So I would say don't do any kind of ministry outside of the accountability and the support of whatever church you are a member of. That's really, really important. Not to say don't pursue desires that you have. At City Bible, we've had situations where someone's like, I'm really passionate about this. Yeah. And it's like, great, let's make sure you're able to do it. Let's make sure we give you the right resources to do it. Some of the early ministries that we have at City Bible are a byproduct, whether it's Union Gospel Mission or the youth group, right? Yeah. It's not the pastor saying, we need this ministry, can you start it? It's people that are excited about the ministry and saying, hey, what do you think about this? Right? Even with this podcast, right? Yeah. You're giving me a call and you're like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Give me some wisdom, give me some guidance, give me some counsel. Yeah. So all of that plays into that level of accountability. So whatever you want to do, plant a church, start a new ministry, start a podcast, do more outreach stuff. Make sure that you have other people in your life that are affirming it, encouraging it, and giving biblical counsel and wisdom. And that's how you'll maintain the faithfulness and being grounded in the ministry that you're doing. Because, once again, to pivot back to Hebrews 10:24, you need one another in order for that ministry to flourish, right? You're provoking and stirring one another to do that work. Yeah. And you need others to help you do exactly that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's great. And it's always awesome to hear how faith became action in your story. And that's really, like you mentioned, that's the heartbeat of Hebrews 10:24. But before we close, as we wind down, I do want to bring it home with some reflections for everyone watching and listening from your life, reflections from your life. Okay. If you could go back and speak to your younger self at each stage, before Christ, during seminary, and the start of the church plant, what would you tell them? What would you tell Vlad?
Buy Tesla stock as soon as you can, like an absorbent amount right? of it. Yeah, I don't know.
Or maybe Bitcoin.
That too. That one's good too. I mean, pre-Christ, it's the answer is come to Jesus as quickly as possible because he's the longing of your soul, right? Like he's the only one that's going to fill that void, and you could avoid a lot of unnecessary heartbreak for you, for your family, and for others. I love when I hear testimonies of people who, a lot of times people are like floored by these testimonies of, I was like an Al Capone type of mobster and I came to Jesus, and people are like, whoa. To me, I'm like, when someone's like, my parents faithfully preached the gospel to me and I believed in Jesus at 13 or 12. I'm like, praise God for that, right?
Amen.
Because then they're being used in a specific way. So come to Jesus. During seminary and church plant, Mark 4, the sower who plants the seed and goes to sleep because he trusts that God is going to do the work. Right? The sower somehow plants, and it doesn't matter how late he stays up and how worried he is and how concerned he is. He can't do nothing. He's there, and God has to produce something. So I think there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of not trusting the Lord, a lot of trying to control things on my own versus scatter the seed of preaching the word, doing the ministry that you can do, and peacefully go to sleep knowing that God is going to produce either the life or the growth of that ministry. So I think I'm an anxious person. I'm prone to anxiety because I'm prone to control. And if there's something, hindsight, armchair quarterbacking is always easy. But hindsight, talking to myself, I'd say, trust the Lord more. Do what is in your control. Peacefully go to sleep, knowing that He's going to accomplish the work that you'll never be able to accomplish on your own.
Amen. Thanks for sharing that. And when we think about the verse, right, the whole premise of this podcast, Hebrews 10:24, stirring, and you mentioned that stirring is it in the Greek, like literally translated to irritating?
It's like provoking, irritating, like kind of to some degree a negative connotation, but in a positive way.
So basically
bugging you
and provoking and pushing you almost, right, to love and good works. What does living edified, just kidding, but edified, right? Look like for you, right, in your current context, practically? Like what, because you said, right, in seminary, the challenge is when it comes to personal walk, you're studying and you take that as devotion. But here in the current context, as a pastor, you're preaching, that is, in a sense, you're serving the church. But outside of that, right, practically speaking, what does that look like to you to spur on believers towards love and good works outside of the, preaching aspect or teaching?
Yeah. So, okay. And this is because you spent a segment of our talk on this topic. For those of you who are considering ministry or seminary, and this is, right, the misconception is that pastoral ministry is the pulpit. It is such a tiny fraction of what it means to stir others and to provoke others unto love and good deeds, right? So if you're in it for the pulpit, you're in it for the wrong reasons. Because most of the time, it's, this week alone, from home visitation to hospital visit, to meeting up one-on-one with somebody, meeting up with a couple one-on-two, counseling. We host a community group where I don't even lead, right? To me, it's just like, let's hospitality. Let's just open up, and I got other guys that are leading discussion. And my strategy is, how do I just be a member of this group that asks people questions, encourages people, challenges people, prays for people? So honestly, to answer that question, as cliche as it might sound, is I strive to do what every other Christian should be doing as a church member, which are the one another's.
Yeah. And I didn't, phrase this to kind of put you in a position to defend yourself, because I know there's so many things behind the scenes that you pastors in our church and just in churches in general are doing. But, many listeners might not see that because all they're seeing is the Sunday time that they have with their pastor, right? There's so many things that you guys are doing in order to spur on that love, spur on believers towards love and good works, which is why I brought the question up. But as we wind down, just the last couple reflections, how do you personally stay encouraged when ministry feels heavy? And twofold, I guess maybe this will kind of segue into the second one, is are there any books that you would recommend to people on the fence about following Christ, pursuing seminary, or planning a church? You mentioned a few early on, but if you want to choose something else, but something that you would recommend for the listeners to listen to or read if they're on the fence about following Christ, attending seminary, or planning a church.
Stay encouraged. Like I stressed, it comes down to identity. I know I don't want to answer in the same exact way, but it is identity.
Okay.
If this fails, if it succeeds, it's not my identity. I am a child of God. I'm a follower of Jesus, and my reward is in heaven.
Yeah.
Right? So therefore, in the highs and in the lows, I have to realize that my purpose is bigger than just the ministry that's in front of me. It is my relationship with the Lord. So not letting the ministry take the place of my relationship with the Lord, which I think when you're doing ministry, that is so easy to do.
It doesn't hinge on you.
Exactly.
Is what you're saying. You're letting God take his place in this ministry, and you're saying, hey, I'm just along for the ride as the Lord sees fit to use me.
Yeah, Pastor John used to say ministry involvement is like an arm in a bucket of water. You might think you are so important, but when you remove the hand, you realize that the level doesn't change that much, right? And it is that. Yeah. It's like you think you're so essential to this. Alex Montoya, he was my preaching professor at the seminary.
Right.
He used to say, preacher, you think you're important? You think you're important? You know what's going to happen? You're going to die, and they're going to bury you, and then they're going to go eat potato salad, and they're going to hire another guy, and the world is going to keep spinning, right? Yeah. So don't let your identity be rooted in that. Like the Lord is doing the work. You be faithful in what you've been called to do. Yeah. So that's how you gotta see that my success and failure is not based on this that I'm attaching myself to, my ministry. It's based on my relationship with King Jesus.
Got it. And then the books.
In each of those three categories?
Yeah.
Man, oof.
Or you could just give, one or two that maybe encompasses one or two of them.
Yeah, I mean, for the non-believer that's considering pursuing Jesus,
but they're interested, they want to absorb content, they want to learn more about Jesus.
So there's this book. I maybe we can throw it in the subtitles or whatever. I don't remember the author, but it's called Magnificent Obsession. Magnificent Obsession. It's this black cover with these orange crisscross lines.
Okay.
I'm sadly blanking on the author of that.
We'll find it and we'll put it up there.
But that one, it just shows you how amazing Jesus is, and that it would be a waste of a life not to follow him. Wow. I love that book. I give that book out a lot. When it comes to church planting, if you're thinking about an introductory church planting book, just to see if this is something that you're interested in, it's this book called Church Planting is for Wimps. It's a 9 Marks book. That one is really, really good. And then number 3, what did you? Oh no, the seminary one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got them out of order. The seminary one, whether you should go to seminary or not.
Go to seminary. Yeah, exactly.
I would say.
Is there any content
Brothers,
on that?
We're Not Professionals by John Piper.
Brothers, We're Not Professionals? Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's not geared towards specifically, hey, am I called to go to seminary or not? It won't answer that. But I think that it keeps you grounded in what the ministry is, that it's not a career path, that it's a calling within you being faithful in the church and what the Lord has given you ministry-wise in the church.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for those reflections. The last thing that I was going to do is lightning round, if you're okay with it.
Yeah.
Lightning round, just short, one answer. Just got 3 questions, and then we will land this plane. One word that describes your season before Christ.
Hedonistic.
Hedonistic. Okay, take that. One lesson that seminary taught you about God's timing.
It's personally annoying, but perfect.
I like that. That's great. One thing church planning taught you about God's faithfulness.
He will build his church no matter what.
Beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
Vlad, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your journey. Your story reminds us that God's faithfulness is steady from salvation to calling to every step of obedience. And I've seen that just in your journey, just you walking through, not knowing what the future may hold, whether it was, initially after coming to Christ, hearing your journey of like people speaking into your life, you following through and responding by pursuing that route of like teaching, and then seminary journey, and then the church plant. You've been such a blessing to so many people, myself included, and you've been such a huge impact. So thank you for that. For everyone watching and listening, I want to encourage you guys from Pastor Vlad's life and just from what we've discussed is that faith that moves doesn't start with a big platform or a title. It starts with a simple yes to God, and then following in suit by taking those actions and steps of faith, right? And so before we close, I want to invite you guys to be part of the Edified journey. If there's a topic you guys like for us to cover, a story that's been on your heart, or a guest you'd love to see on the Edified podcast, please reach out and maybe your idea will shape a future episode. You can reach us at Instagram at edified_podcast or message me directly at Eddie Lashenko. We read every comment and DM because this isn't just a podcast. I don't want this to be just another podcast. It's a growing community of believers stirring one another towards love and good works. And so the last message I want to give you guys is that if this conversation stirred your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more faith-building stories. This is Edified, where we stir one another to love and good works. Until next time, stay grounded, stay encouraged, and of course, stay edified.